Hi, I'm Smita Joshi, and I have the privilege of having a conversation today with Christopher Plowman, the visionary CEO of the phenomenal meditation app, Insight Timer. Welcome, Christopher. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know you're in Bali, right? It must be very late your time.
I am, Smita. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. That was a very kind introduction. It's nice to be called a visionary. I haven't been called that before. Yes, it's 8:15 in the evening, so it's been a long day, but I'm very happy to be having a nice, relaxing chat with you to finish my day.
Good. Well, Christopher, I'm so happy to have this opportunity to talk to you because I want to start by thanking you personally. I started contributing my meditations to Insight Timer from just about a month ago, and I'm absolutely blown away by the Insight Timer community. They are so generous in their response to my meditations. I have 3 on there now. And, I can't thank you enough for the incredible platform that is Insight Timer.
Well, again, that's another very kind remark, Smita. Thank you. I think one of the things I love most about Insight Timer is the fact that I think we now have about 1,500 teachers on the app. And about 18 months ago, we had no teachers on the app. And obviously, we've got some of a lot of the big name meditators, teachers, if you like, the Jack Cornfields and Tara Brachs and Mujis and so on, who've all been sort of instrumental, if you like, in bringing meditation into the mainstream. But we also have hundreds of people who are, who don't necessarily have the name attached with their practice and who upload guided meditations and very quickly build a very big audience of followers. I think I was mentioning to you earlier, we have a guy called Andy Hobson who started with us about a year and a half ago, and he's got 70,000 people who now follow him on the app. So it's a great platform if you're a meditation teacher to get your teachings and to get your name out to a big audience. We have almost 3 million people on the app now. And I love that about Insight Timer, that it's the great leveler. Obviously, knowledge is not political. It's not. Knowledge is knowledge. And what the great thing about Insight Timer is anyone can get up there and share their teachings, and the community will interact with those teachings that they find relevant. And you can't find, I don't think, another app at the moment that provides that. So you're welcome. Welcome to Insight Timer.
It's such an opportunity to contribute. Now, you didn't start Insight Timer, did you? Tell us about how Insight Timer came into being in your hands.
I didn't start Insight Timer myself. My brother Nico is a meditation teacher. I spent 20 years building online communities and startups.
Yes.
And about 4 years ago, Nico taught me to meditate, and I thought meditation was going to be, in a positive way, quite disruptive on a number of things in society and for the planet. And Nico and I decided that we actually wanted to build a big meditation community that could help teachers meet meditation students. So we actually went out looking for meditation apps, and Insight Timer was the one that we ended up purchasing. We bought it now, I think, 3.5 years ago. But it wasn't started by me. It was started by a guy called Brad Fulmer, a lovely, quiet Californian who lived in Petaluma, outside of San Francisco. And so Nico and I jumped on a plane about 4 years ago and went to see him and said, look, we think he was running the app on his own. It had about 100,000 users. And frankly, he just didn't have the time or the resources to make it bigger, and he was quite worn out. So we asked him whether he would mind if we bought it and took it over and scaled it. And he said yes. So I just want to make sure that the story is accurate and that we preserve the integrity of that history and that Brad's recognised as the person who started it.
Oh, I appreciate that. I did hear that in your podcast with my good friend Tom Evans.
I had lunch with Tom in London a couple of weeks ago. I always love catching up with Tom. I didn't know that you two knew each other.
Oh, yeah. He is a good friend. I'm the author of a trilogy called Karma and Diamonds. It's a journey of self-discovery across continents and lifetimes. And I met Tom, I think it was in 2010 or so, when I was really struggling. I had this notion of writing a book, and that was when I contacted Tom for some help in giving me some guidance in getting this writing thing off the ground. And he's become a good friend, and now I have a trilogy, and he is just amazing. He's a mentor, a friend. What can I say? I just love Tom Evans.
Yes, he's great. He's almost Insight Timer's sort of resident interviewer, because I think he's done, is it 3 interviews with me now, which we post up on the app. So every time I have something that I want to talk about with our community, I reach out to Tom, and he interviews me, and we put it up on the app. So
Awesome.
Many thanks to Tom.
Awesome. So let's talk about the fact that you have scaled Insight Timer from when you bought it initially with something around 100,000 users.
Mm-hmm.
So you are as much a social entrepreneur as you are a social media entrepreneur. And in your podcast with Tom, you mentioned that you're investing something in the region of $2.5 million a year to maintain and further develop the Insight Timer platform. That's a considerable investment. So how do you balance the return of equity with the social entrepreneurial aspect of Insight Timer?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And in fact, I remember saying that actually to Tom on that interview, and I got a lot of messages from people on the app saying, oh, we just had no idea. Because, of course, you don't consider these things. You know, you wake up in the morning, you turn the timer on, or you listen to a guided meditation, and it's very easy to sort of just not consider what goes on in the background to make that happen. But when you have sort of 3 million users, it can be very expensive. We have about 20 staff now. We have sort of virtual teams all around the world. Our hosting bills alone are about $500,000 a year, because, of course, we have to put multiple versions of the app on multiple servers all around the world, so that if one server goes down, it bounces to another server. So there's a lot of technical complexity to keeping it up and running. But when Nico and I bought Insight Timer, there was 2 things we wanted to do, really. The first was we wanted to give meditation away to everyone for free. We're quite passionate about this idea. We think that everyone deserves access to a meaningful daily meditation practice which is free. We've never found that the way the other apps do this is kind of the right way. If you believe wholeheartedly that raising consciousness is essential and that meditation is essential for people's happiness, then it shouldn't exclusively be something that's reserved for people who can afford it. It's a bit like water and air and love and security and all of these sorts of things. And so we thought, well, how can we do that? And in fact, when we bought the app, it was a paid app. I think it was $7 or something like that. So the first thing we did was we made it free. And of course, the second thing we wanted to do is we wanted to create a way for meditation teachers to actually earn meaningful income. We think that it's apparent that teachers are essential, really, as an essential part of society. But most meditation teachers do a lot of this stuff in their spare time, right? Because it doesn't pay its way. They're not full-time meditation teachers. They're school teachers, or they're nurses, or they're authors, or they're many other things. And they come home in the evening and they spend a few hours creating some guided meditations, and then they go back to their day job. And this really isn't okay for us. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to give meditation away to everyone for free, and we also wanted to build a big, vibrant, sustainable business model so meditation teachers could spend more time on teaching, more time on building great content, and more time on getting the knowledge out there. Now, of course, these 2 things are very difficult to achieve at the same time. Right? How do you give your product away for free and create, meaningful monthly income for thousands of teachers? So we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And in the end, I think we've come up with 3 ideas that will help us get there. Obviously, we don't know that to be true. And we're just very thankful and very lucky that I happen to know 2 people who can afford to pay our bills, and which is what they've been doing for the last few years, while we try and get that model right. So that's really how we weigh it up. I'm fortunate to have met 2 people that have been very lucky in life financially, who are very compassionate and conscious individuals. One's an Australian woman who I met on a meditation retreat. Another is a Chinese person, a Chinese man who lives in San Francisco. And they're essentially paying our costs while I try and create a business model that helps us achieve objectives 1 and 2.
Wow. Gratitude to them.
Yes, I am eternally grateful to them, actually. I've been raising money for startup companies for the last 20 years, and I've always had good relationships with investors, actually, even in times when some of the companies I started didn't work. But these two people are quite different. I remember one of them said to me once when we were talking about how much we should charge for one of the products that we're going to introduce, which we'll be introducing early next year. And he said to me, Christopher, it's important that you charge what you need, not what you want. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And for a venture capital guy, most of them who are interested in one thing only, which is money,
Yes.
to say something like that to the CEO of a company kind of says volumes really about what these two people are like, because you just don't meet people like that. I'll tell you his name. The other person's a more private individual, but his name is Bo Sheo, and he's just launched a $100 million fund to help entrepreneurs build conscious companies. It's called the Conscious Accelerator. He runs a foundation called the Evolve Foundation. And he's a super interesting guy, and we need more people like him. And he's one of the few people who've made money, who's putting his money where his mouth or his heart is, and is backing companies like Insight Timer.
Amazing. Really also very heartening to hear that. In terms of the kind of investors you're attracting, Christopher, that does speak volumes about your own commitment and how clear your dedication is to what you're doing in terms of keeping true to your values in how to grow Insight Timer, right? Because you're attracting people who are reflecting that back to you in terms of hardcore investment. So that's really amazing.
Yes, well, look, I think there are 3 things. I think most investors, look, I don't know if this is true, but I think most investors kind of make up their mind if they're going to invest very quickly. Of course, they'll negotiate on price and things like that. But I think they weigh up subliminally 2 things very quickly when you're first meeting with them or as you're going through meetings. The first one is, what is this person's intention? Right? Intention really matters more than anything, really. If someone does something to you that upsets you, but they do it unintentionally, meaning that their intentions were good, you tend to overlook, if you're compassionate, you tend to overlook the fact that maybe they did something you didn't like. So intention is the first thing. And the second one is honesty. Do I trust this person to look after my money and do what he's intending? Right?
Yes.
And I think a lot of people miss that when they try and raise money. They sort of go in and present a very interesting product and a very interesting business plan and a very interesting forecast of revenue and all this sort of thing. But really what the investor's doing is sitting there subconsciously analysing your intentions and your honesty or your integrity, if you like. And of course, the third thing that then kicks in once they've invested is, do you execute well? Are you actually capable of fulfilling those intentions? And I think a lot of people, younger people who are trying to build companies and raise money, need to analyse those 3 things, because it's those 3 things actually that will determine whether your company is successful or not. It's not your product, and it's not your business plan, and it's not your logo, and it's not all of those sorts of things. Yes. It's intention, integrity, and execution that really will determine whether you get there in the end. And my point, and I waffled on a bit there, Smita, but my point is, I think the universe supports companies like that. I have said in a previous podcast, I can't remember to whom, that raising money for Insight Timer has been one of the easiest things I've ever done. Finding the right team for Insight Timer has been the easiest thing I've ever done. And of course, at the moment, we're now getting sort of 8, 9, 10,000 people signing up to the app every single day, right? 10,000 new people joining the community every single day.
Incredible.
And we don't spend any money. We don't advertise. We don't buy ads on Google. We don't have a PR team. We don't have a marketing team. And so we've got thousands of, 60, 70,000 people a week signing up to Insight Timer, which means that too is being one of the easiest growth models that I've ever been involved with. And I think as I get older, I'm 43 now, but I do genuinely think that the universe does support things with good intentions. It's not to say that companies that don't have good intentions don't get there. I mean, if you look at a company like Facebook, I guess we can talk about that some other time, but they might have started out with good intentions, but I think some of the things that they're doing now probably would suggest that, or at least that their public brand isn't consistent with their private intentions. So there are still companies that with sort of sheer brute force manage to be very successful. But I do think that the universe will support programs and companies and people with the right intentions.
You've just tuned into that question that I was about to ask, which is the fact that as a company grows, the temptations are so strong to become commercial, like we're talking about Facebook and many other companies who start out with honorable and noble intentions. But then as they grow, other influences from outside come in, and you did mention venture capital or investors and so on. And the fact that you now have a baby, sometimes it becomes something of a beast in a sense, where you've grown it, it has been your passion, and it's not something you can let go of easily. The question that I was going to ask you, and you've partially answered it, maybe you want to add something to it, is that, as you expand your user base, how do you do that without selling your soul and the app becoming like a hard commercial one? I see you being somewhere between Instagram and Wikipedia in the meditation space.
Oh, well, I have many things to say about Instagram, and I don't like that comparison at all.
Well, you may not.
No, but I know what you mean.
The
Functionally.
organizations. I'm talking more about the scale.
Yes, so there's a lot to unpack there. They're all good questions, and I'd like to answer them all, actually. The first one is actually, Insight Timer is nothing more than a community. And a community, kind of by definition, is just a group of people that congregate around a shared set of ideals, right? Mm. So, yes, Nico and I bought the company, and yes, we bought the app and the technology, but you can't buy a community, right? I like to sort of consider us as custodians at the moment of the community. But if we don't do what our community likes, then they will just congregate somewhere else, right? So I think that the community keeps us honest. I get lots when we make a change to the app or we do something different, or they let me know about it. Right? Yes. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think it really depends on what the founders are, and I know we're not the founders, but we're the owners now, what it is that we set out to do and whether we stay true to that. We've always said right from the start that it is very important for us to see if we can give meditation to the world for free and create sustainable income, meaningful income for teachers, and in doing so, build a very successful company. And we've been very open about that because we actually think it's very important that there are successful, conscious companies. Up until now, you've kind of got two types of companies, right? You've got companies that are purely conscious, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem with sort of organizations or pursuits or companies that are purely conscious is they tend to become hobbies, right? Because they have no financial sustainability. So they tend to actually disintegrate after a while because it has no financial infrastructure. The problem with purely commercial entities which don't have any conscious application or conscious intent is they too, it takes a lot longer because money-hungry people tend to get very excited about that. And, banks are a good example of this, if you like, financiers. is they don't really last either eventually, because if you're purely focused on profit and money and greed, eventually, nature won't support it. The universe won't support something like that. And of course, this is why you find many rich people who spend the first 40 years of their life accumulating wealth, then turn around at 60 and decide that they want to go and give it all away, right? Because they feel very hollow inside. That's a whole other conversation we can have about
it's a whole other conversation.
the definition of philanthropy.
Philanthropy, yeah.
I always like to say it's not called philanthropy if you've spent your life acquiring your fortune by stepping all over others.
Yes, and leaving a trail of dead bodies behind you, indeed.
Correct. You're just returning stolen goods. All these articles about philanthropic funds from people who have amassed their wealth in an unethical way, to me, are not philanthropists.
Yes.
And the definition of philanthropy is someone who cares about the plight of others, selflessly cares about the plight of others. And it bugs me that the media
give it so much importance.
People up in lights and say, isn't this person amazing that he's given $5 billion to a fund? Well, of course, it's not amazing, because that money doesn't belong to them in the first place, because they took it unethically. And this is actually, I guess this ties back to your question, but if you take a company like Facebook, I have no doubt that that company started out with perhaps even no intention at all. Mark was just trying to create the Facebook where people could, I have no doubt that company did not start with malicious intent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere along the way, greed took over. There's a very interesting man called Professor Scott Galloway who's just launched a book called The Four, and he talks about Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Google, and how their public persona is not really consistent with their private financial actions. Two examples that he used of Facebook. I don't know if you'll remember this, but about 5 years ago, they launched pages on Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg said to all small businesses out there, get as many people to follow you on Facebook. You'll always have access to those followers. They'll be your followers, and you'll never have to pay to access them. And, of course, everyone did. And I did. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with my other company getting all of my customers to sign up to Facebook and to follow my company on Facebook. And we ended up getting 100,000 people to follow us on Facebook. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, Facebook decided that you could no longer, when you posted messages on Facebook, get those messages out to your followers. You could only access them if you pay Facebook.
Boosted.
Right,
Yeah.
boosted posts.
Space, yeah.
And Professor Scott Galloway calls this the biggest bait and switch of our commercial time. And it's true. Frankly, most of Mark Zuckerberg's wealth has been accumulated by getting millions of small businesses like my own to contribute their customers into Facebook. And once we'd all done that, unfortunately, his actions didn't match the stated intentions. And all of those customers were stolen from millions of small businesses. And that's why, look, it probably sounds like I need to meditate a bit more, but that's why I find it frustrating when people talk about the new Chan Zuckerberg philanthropic fund, because that's sort of the endowments that are placed in that fund are essentially the hard-earned customers of millions of small businesses around the world. And I think it needs to be talked about, right? Intention and action needs to be addressed. And so I'm saying it, I'm calling it.
Awesome.
I guess this sort of evolution of intention through a company's life is where this question originally started, and how we were going to keep Insight Timer honest. And I think we will do that by simply continuing to communicate with our users, explain to them why we're doing things. We're about to launch our first financial sort of, product on the app, our first product that can be purchased sometime over Christmas. And so that's going to be an interesting transition for some people. But really what I was referring to earlier was this sort of these people that amass huge amounts of wealth and then sort of attach a big public fanfare to the fact that they're now donating it to the less fortunate. Whereas the reason why a lot of those people are already less fortunate is because these people amassed a huge amount of wealth at their expense in the first place. And I think that paradoxical position needs to be talked about, right? I don't think we should simply sort of put up in lights all of these, certainly some philanthropists, of course, people who've made their money through creativity or through honesty and hard work, and who are giving it away, fantastic. But I do think we need to shine a spotlight on a number of philanthropic funds and pursuits, despite the fact that they're doing good. I think we should recognise the good that they're doing, but we should also not put the people who are doing it up in lights if they've acquired that money through questionable means. I think ethics is important, and we should talk about it.
Oh, absolutely agreed. Christopher, did you intend for Insight Timer to be a disruptive tool that it has become, or was that an accident?
Geez, that's another good question, Smita. I wasn't prepared for these insightful questions at 9 p.m. in the evening. Okay, no, we didn't. However, our thinking has changed a little bit on that, and I'll explain what I mean. So, giving away meditation for free shouldn't be, I mean, it should disrupt in a positive way, right? Because people don't have to pay for meditation, and that has a positive influence on the lives of many, many people around the world. So I think meditation might be disruptive. I hope meditation is disruptive. I mean, if you look at all of this sort of apparatus that we build, this artificial apparatus, you know, political networks and military networks and borders and ownership, and probably if I could throw in religious networks as there as well, we build all of these networks to create identity and ownership and to manage wealth and all these sorts of things, right? And some of them are great. Cultural identity is fantastic, and some of them really aren't great because they exclude others. It depends on which sort of apparatus you're talking about. But Nico and I feel that a lot of this architecture, if you like, that we build is put in place because, well, to be frank, you know, parts of our society are not very conscious, right? So I don't think we have a conscious president in the United States at the moment, and so his natural inclination, and I'm not sort of politically condemning one person or another, but I don't think you could make the claim that Donald Trump is a conscious individual. And so his natural reaction is retreat, right? It's build a wall, it's divide, it's, you know, that it comes from a position of a combative position, right? And most of the things I just talked about, military ownership and all these sorts of things, are a defensive mode, a combative defensive position. And so meditation really kind of tells you that all of that stuff is impermanent and irrelevant and just a reflection of your own insecurities. And so that's really why we think it's important that more people meditate, right? Because we hope that it will dismantle some of these man-made apparatus that we've built, right? That's the first thing. But really what we've also discovered, which was quite a surprise to us, is this is a harder one to say because I don't want to come across as sort of being too competitive, because in fact we're not competitive. But what we found is that there are quite a number of meditation apps out there that, first of all, that are paid meditation apps that have built big commercial engines which depend on you paying them to meditate and have become quite competitive. You know, one app, who shall remain nameless, we found out a couple of months ago, is actually asking people to sign contracts which says that they will never work with Insight Timer.
Ooh,
right?
Gosh.
Yes. And that was a big surprise for us because, of course, we're just trying to give meditation away for free. We're trying to create income for teachers. And, of course, we hope to build a very big, sustainable company to prove that you can have a conscious commercial enterprise. In fact, that you should have a conscious commercial enterprise. But so in that respect, I do hope it's disruptive, right? Because, and I actually met this particular app. I went and met with them and said, guys, there is a big difference between being competitive and being anti-competitive, right? You guys should be allowed to build a big, successful meditation app, and I hope you do, because that's going to bring great relief and meditation to millions of people. But you shouldn't want to do that by trying to put another meditation app out of business.
Yes.
Right? I got out of my previous commercial life because it was very cutthroat. I built a discount ticketing company in Australia, and it ended up doing quite well after years of disasters. And that was highly competitive and very anti-competitive at times with some of the other participants. And I really thought when I got into the meditation space that we wouldn't be confronted with that. And I was very surprised to learn, actually, it gets back to that intention thing we talked about earlier, that there are some meditation apps out there who have unfortunately perhaps forgotten what their original intent is, because the money has set in and perhaps they've forgotten what was all about in the first place. And so I hope Insight Timer in that respect will be disruptive, that it will actually remind some of the paid apps out there that, don't be too anti-competitive, because there's a free product out there as well. I'm not sure if that made sense.
Absolutely. No, I completely get what you're saying. And, there's an element to this that you haven't talked about, Christopher, which I would like to add also, is that the disruption aspect of this, which is so beautiful, is the fact that, for thousands and thousands of years, there have been gurus out there who have been trying to get meditation out to people, to the masses, over thousands of years. So let's not forget the really brilliant aspect of your tool is the fact that it's reaching communities now all over the world. And, the other thing as well is that sometimes people don't want to admit that they might be interested in doing something as flower power as meditation. And so to have the privacy of their own mobile phone and headset and a free app that they don't have to invest in, and then have access to such incredible resources of the variety of meditations that you offer now, is just, I can't think of a bigger gift or a legacy to leave from a spiritual point of view for somebody. I think that's an aspect of the disruption that you are offering here that I think you should also, think about. I think it's really great.
Yeah, look, we do. I sometimes say to my team, sometimes we get quite overwhelmed. We receive hundreds of messages every day from the community, and often I receive them personally. Unfortunately, I can't respond to them all. Every now and then I do when one is particularly touching. But we do literally get people from all over the world, from every country you can think of, from every socioeconomic background you can think of. And people say to me, and I don't want to sound dramatic, but this is the emails that I get, which is, this app, this community has saved my life. I was suffering from depression or addiction or, going through recovery or a very hard time or a breakup or I was just unhappy at work or I was dealing with confidence issues and whatever it was. And I found Insight Timer, and it's this great contemplative, compassionate community where there's no judgment. It's free to just come on and listen to a piece of meditation music and it's that great sentence from Steve Jobs, which is that ideas are very fragile. And I think the idea of Insight Timer is very fragile, right? Especially if other meditation apps out there are trying to put us out of business and we don't have the financial resources to sort of scale fast enough. But it does feel like to me that we finally got to a certain size now where our size will protect us, right? And we can continue to grow this. And it's sort of exhilarating and it's terrifying and it's emotionally overwhelming sometimes. But I look every morning, I wake up, the first thing I do is I look at how many people were there every single day. There are more people meditating, they're interacting with more teachers. So I've never considered a legacy, and I guess the legacy would belong to Brad, the guy who started it, perhaps, who had the original idea. But yeah, look, I think that Insight Timer is an extremely important resource right now, today on this planet, and I don't think that there are many apps like it.
I agree.
I
think you're too humble, Christopher. I really do. I think it's perfectly okay to acknowledge that you're making the profound difference that you are.
Well, look, none of my friends would call me humble, so
Well,
I think you have to look. I think humility is very important because it's. I think humility is very important when you're building a startup, because it means you have to be honest with yourself and you have to listen. But you also do need a little bit of chutzpah.
you do need the courage and the resilience to be able to withstand both criticism and the things that are not working out. That was a question that I had for you here, in fact, was, as an entrepreneur, in fact, a social media entrepreneur, what practical advice would you give to those of us who are starting out on our journey? So you mentioned humility, you mentioned resilience, you mentioned
Chutzpah, yes, balls. You do need
chutzpah,
balls. Well, you need a little bit of stupidity,
risk
really.
taking. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I think about all the, I mean, look, I have a couple of people I speak to from time to time for advice, but there's literally 1,000,001 reasons why Insight Timer shouldn't work, right? Mm-hmm. You could sit here and you could list hundreds of things that would be perfectly valid, logical sentences about why Insight Timer is not going to work, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You could just quote statistics. You could just say, look, statistically, 90% of startups fail in the first year and 90% of the 10% fail in the second 3 years, and meditation. There's thousands of things, right? And yet, here we are. Look, I think you have to be passionate to start with, and you need to be able to articulate your intentions. That's super important because that's what creates funding. And then you need to be honest about your successes and your failures with that funding, because obviously we make many decisions that turn out to be wrong. So you need to communicate those always. And then thirdly, as I said, you need to execute. They're the three things.
Gorgeous. Beautiful. One of the things that I find really personally challenging is growing community. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts on how to develop a genuine community. How do you begin, and what challenges should you be prepared for?
Oh, that's the hardest one of all. That's the hardest one of all. And in actual fact, maybe this is some useful advice to anyone who's out there who's trying to build community. That's why Nico and I decided that we needed to go and find an existing community, because ideas are fragile, as I said. So when we got involved in Insight Timer, I think there was already about 600 or 700 groups on the app. We now have about 6,000 groups on the app.
Wow.
But there were, and all of these groups are individually, they're created by our users, they're administrated by our users, the administrators appoint some moderators from the community. It's all self-governed, right? And they range from topics, they range from all over. We have Rumi poetry groups, we have, meditation musician groups, we have Buddhism groups, we have relationship groups. And they're in China and the far northern reaches of India and Chicago and Sydney and Auckland, and they come from all over. But I don't know how you actually foster community, because when we bought the app, as I said, there were 600 groups. They were already there. And of course, we've done nothing with our group's product. I've just sat there and been amazed at how much it's grown. Some of the people on our app who are just meditators said there's one group on the app called Be Here Now, and it's run by an administrator called Satyam. I've never met him. I don't know his first name. We chat a lot, but he prefers to be anonymous. I'm assuming it's a he. It could be a she. Mm-hmm. And his group has 100,000 people in it. And he just, every day, he posts a question which says, what are you grateful for today? But I don't know how you build community. I don't actually think that we've been responsible. I don't think anything that Nico and I and our team have done I I don't know, it's kind of like magic, isn't it? It's just the universe supporting us again. There was a little grass fire and it's turned into a bushfire. And I've been very careful to not get involved. Every now and then I have to wade in and pull a few people up and say, come on, that's not the way we do things around here. But I've let, self-governing communities are far stronger than any dictatorship, right? If people have ownership and feel like they're in charge of their local communities, they're much more active, they're much more involved. So and we have people who disagree about something in a group, and I will always say the same thing, which is we don't arbitrate. We're not here to tell you how to run your group or to tell you what the rules are. It's your group. So maybe that's the answer. I don't know.
I heard consistency, keeping the space clean. I heard true leadership comes in giving away and allowing other people to own the platform in a sense, to feel that they can take charge. So you're leading by creating the environment. And, you have a certain set of ground rules, you've got your values are in place and you stay true to those. And within that, things grow.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think consistency is probably, of all of those, that was the most concise. That was the one that sort of resonated with me most. I think you have to sort of create the framework and say, right, off you go. But consistency also means that you have to be willing sometimes to reach in and take a few weeds out. That might not sound very compassionate, but in fact it is. You could count on maybe 2 hands and 2 feet the number of times that we've had to actually ban someone from the community. And as I said, we've got 3 million, so statistically it's just an anomaly. But you do need to be willing to go in and say, listen, first of all, you need to do it compassionately, and secondly, you need to provide warnings. But it's just the simple fact of life that every now and then you're going to have people who just want to disrupt, and that's their only purpose for being there, and you need to act very decisively in those instances so that everyone else sort of feels protected and safe. So consistency and...
Great. Penultimately then, so as a new meditation teacher like myself on your platform, what advice can you give to me and others like me to grow and make a more substantial impact on Insight Timer?
Look, I think there's a few things, and we're still learning this as we go too. There's no rhyme or reason to us about why some people resonate more than others. Obviously, it has a lot to do with the teachings. But of course, we find that teachers who upload content more frequently tend to be more front of mind, if you like, for the people who follow them. We have some teachers who've created their own groups and start discussion groups. But clearly there are some obvious things, right? Audio quality is super important, right? If you're trying to meditate and you're listening to a meditation with your headphones, succinct, slow and calm language delivered through very crisp audio creates a much better product. And I think, back to what we talked about earlier on, isn't it? Intention and honesty, right? Actually lay it out. I find teachers I think this is why I've built kind of a good relationship with our community, because I'm the first to acknowledge that I struggle with maintaining a daily meditation practice, right? I don't, a lot of other meditation teachers and whatnot sort of profess an air of superiority with their meditation practice and the fact that it's easy for them and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not like that at all, right? I don't consider myself a teacher in any way, shape or form, but obviously we lead a community of 3 million people. I think being authentic and actually exposing your vulnerabilities when you're ready to do that will actually endear you to more people on the app. So don't be too shiny, don't be too polished, be authentic.
Beautiful. Christopher, to close, it would be amiss of me to not ask you, how is your meditation evolving and what challenges are you facing?
Well, the big one is the same challenge I faced since day one, which some days I just can't be bothered doing it, right? This is the big problem. And when I say that, it's not that I don't realize the benefits of meditation, but I'm like most normal people, right? I get frustrated, I get upset, and I get busy, and I get tired, and The thing I've always struggled with most is maintaining a consistent daily practice. And I think most people who are honest with themselves about meditation and who lead busy lives will acknowledge that that's the hardest part.
Yep.
Right? It's not the sitting, because once you sit and once you sat, it's like getting up in the morning, going for a run, dragging yourself out of bed's a nightmare, and then when you get home, you feel great, right? And when you don't go, you feel terrible. It's this constant sort of circular issue. The hard bit is just doing it every day, and I've struggled with that since day one. And how has my practice evolved? My practice has evolved quite a lot in the last 12 months, but I'm not sure if that's relevant to other meditators. I think it's evolved because I'm the CEO of Insight Timer, which means I have access to lots of really interesting meditation teachers. Obviously, everyone has access to them on the app. But I spend a lot of time exploring the corners of the app, right? I've discovered Islamic music recently, for example, right? Because I like to know all the content on our app. I would have not done that if I was just meditating. I did that sort of in a professional capacity, and so that's had an impact on my meditation practice, because I was meditating with Islamic music for a month or two. I went and explored the teachings of Kabbalah, which is kind of the mystical arm of Judaism, right? So, I mean, by all means, as I said, we've got 7,000 free guided meditations on the app from 50 different origins. It's you can get lost on Insight Timer for weeks and weeks and weeks because there's so much interesting stuff. So I'm not sure my answer is applicable unless you are one of those people that's deeply curious about all this sort of stuff. So it's meant that initially I would do 20 minutes a day in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon. That's, through Vedic meditation. And that for me, frankly, became really difficult after a period of time. So then I've started exploring other things to create some variety. So on any given month, you could ask me that question and my meditation practice would be very different to what it was beforehand. Maybe that means I'm not a real meditator.
What happens when you get into meditation is we begin to explore various possibilities, various avenues, and various practices, and I think that's really, really great. On that note, I will invite you to listen to one of my meditations. My most latest one is called Connect to Your Guru Within, and I would love to know what you think of it.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you so much, and I hope that
what was it called? Let me search for it again. Connect with your guru within.
Connect to your guru within.
All right, I'll do that tonight before I go to bed.
Awesome. And I look forward to speaking to you in the near future, hopefully.
Yes, let's jump back on in 12 months' time and see if our fragile idea is still continuing.
Oh, I'm a super stand that it's going to exponentially grow.
Okay, lovely, Smita. I thank you very much for your time. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I really appreciate this. I'm Smita Joshi, and thank you for listening. You can find my books, the Karma and Diamonds Trilogy, a journey of self-discovery across continents and lifetimes, on Amazon or on smitajoshi.com. For my videos, visit my YouTube channel called The Self-Discovery Channel. Namaste.